Everyone. I think sometimes I like to talk, but definitely not speaking in front of a group, although it's kind of small today, which is nice. Speaking in front of a crowd is not something I do at all, especially not for kind of the length, which is the length that it will be today, which is lengthier than normal, at least for me. So bear with me. With that, I'd like to maybe start off with a brief prayer, and we'll go from there. Dear Heavenly Father, we just want to thank you for this time, for this day that we can gather. Father God, speak through me, be here today as I share my story with the church. And I just pray that your presence be felt. And I pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. A quick intro would be helpful, because I guess not everyone knows who I am, because I know there's at least one new face, maybe. If your wife joins us, will be two. But my name is Will. I am an elder here at F3C. The treasurer specifically, and my family and I, we've been here at this church since the inception. So 18, 19, 20 years. So it's been a while. So we've been part of this church for a while. So I'll get started. So it's been a busy few weeks for me specifically. Our family, it's been pretty busy. We were away on vacation in Europe for 2 weeks. We came back last Sunday, but all the while, we're also doing renovations at home. So it's been, while we were in Europe traveling, I spent quite a bit of my time also communicating with our contractor and making decisions and picking things and, checking up on the house and everything else. So, we've been back for a week, and, renovations are still going, as you can imagine. And, it's been quite busy, I think mentally, and we've been living out of our suitcases for the last 3 weeks, I guess, because we traveled and now we're just staying somewhere else. So, we're hoping to move back into our house tomorrow. That's the plan, so fingers crossed. Tomorrow is move-in day. But it's been pretty busy. So when we had to, I always had to prepare for this. So we had an elder sharing preparation workshop this past week, and we did this word cloud exercise on the word welcome. So, we all thought about what the word welcome of God means to each one of us. So I took that exercise and I reflected more of it on my own this week, and I came up with kind of two concepts that what welcome means to me. That came out, and the first one is invitation. And I think that's pretty straightforward. And the second one is, I think, a little bit more complex, but it's like being in the presence. It's not really encompassing what I'm thinking. I think there's other words that kind of that touch on it a bit, like embrace, comfort. The words blanket also come to mind. So it's that. So the first part of welcome to me, invitation. Second part, being in the presence, comfort, blanket, all those kind of words kind of make an impact for me. So I'll be sharing kind of those two and how that affects, my story. So when Diana asked earlier this week if there was a passage that would resonate with my sharing, first off, I didn't really have much planned because there's been so much going on. And I think immediately I was thinking like, no, I won't have a passage. Nothing's going to come up. Nothing's going to stick out. But the story of Martha and Mary came up, and I thought, you know what, it's fitting. It kind of makes sense. I think partly it came up, due to recency, because I think for those of us who were at retreat, that was one of the passages we reflected on, so it kind of stuck out. But really, the story really encompasses the things that make sense to me about welcome. The first one is the invitation, and that's pretty obvious. Jesus was invited to their home for a meal. And really the second part is, Mary. Mary is just simply being in his presence. So I can only imagine what she was feeling, kind of those feelings I was talking about, just being in the presence, being embraced, being in the comfort, and the word blanket keeps coming to my head, right? So it's just being enveloped in Christ. So that's kind of why that passage stuck out to me. Again, maybe of recency, but it made sense for today. So I like to start by sharing my story of my first invitation to God, and I guess obviously by God. So my backstory: I grew up in a non-Christian home, but the concept of God wasn't really foreign to me. My mom went to a Catholic school growing up, so she had a lot of head knowledge. Like she was by no means a practicing Catholic or a Christian or anything like that, but she had a lot of the head knowledge, and she kind of passed that knowledge loosely to me throughout my years, but mostly for what I would term as parenting tools. So a lot of times she'd be like, "Hey, don't lie because God knows," or what else did she say? She's like, "Don't do this bad thing because God's watching you," or "Honor thy father and thy mother." So she would often reference there are 10 commandments, but she really focused on the ones that she wants to parent me with. So that was one aspect of kind of God kind of being a little bit around. And the other thing that she would do is she would often recite the Lord's Prayer. I remember, I recall sometimes, I think in bed, when she puts me to sleep, she's lying in bed. Reciting the Lord's Prayer is one of the things she did once in a while. But I know for sure when we traveled and on a plane, before takeoff, it was a routine thing that she did, was reciting the Lord's Prayer. So I at an early age, not coming from a Christian background or from a Christian home, I think I was able to recite the Lord's Prayer, but just ultimately having an understanding of this concept of a God, just knowing that someone like a God existed, just again, just by my mom using it against me. So that was me growing up, and then come grade 8, specifically at the end of the school year. I remember being around the lockers at school, and one of my friends simply asked, "Hey, would you want to go to my church's summer youth camp?" And my first reaction was, in my head, was no, I don't. But I didn't want to be harsh, so I'm like, I wanted to let him off softly. So I'm like, I'll go home, I'll ask my parents, and I'll get back to you. And I'm thinking in my head, I have this really great plan because my parents won't let me go. I'm sure they won't let me go because, going to retreats or camps, it's not, going away for the summer for a few days at all. Like that was, at that age, that's been never part of my family traditions or schedules or patterns. So I'm like, and again, there's been no Christian kind of like influence in my home. So like, why would they, right? So I was thinking, I'll go home, ask my parents. They'll say no. I have an excuse to say, hey, I can't come. So I went home, and I remember asking my mom pretty nonchalantly, also just playing into that role, like I don't really think I want to go. And I told her about it, and she said yes. Almost immediately, she said yes. I swear that she probably filled in the form and wrote the check that moment as well. So it was like, my plan, my master plan didn't really work out. So I was thinking, okay, I guess I'm going to this church camp. So that wasn't how I thought things would go, but that's how it ended up. So ultimately, obviously, I ended up going to ECBC's youth camp in the summer of my grade 8, grade 9 year. I went to UVic, and my friend didn't invite anybody else from school. At least not that I was aware of. At least no one that said yes. So I was kind of there on my own. I didn't know anybody. Everyone was new. So the only person that I knew was the friend that invited me. This is important to note because you would think as part of a planning process for, as a youth camp that invites a lot of people, that you would be paired up with the person that invited you. I was not paired up with him at all for anything. So in the group discussions, he was in a different group. You would think maybe at least I would be in the same room with him, sharing. Nope, he was not in my room, nor was he in my building. So he was off somewhere else in a different building, different room, different group completely. So here I am, pretty on my own. And I think some of these rooms had roommates. I also didn't have a roommate, so it was just me, all by myself at UVic, which is, if you know UVic, it's a pretty big school. So it's, yeah. So to top it off, I opened the closet of that room, and in the closet there was someone that inscribed something, and it said, "So and so died in this room on this day." So here I am, I think I'm 13 at a camp that I didn't want to be at, with no one that I knew, a whole bunch of strangers in a death room. So that was, that was the start of my camp, youth camp. But ultimately there were other youth there, and my peers that cared for me and were watching out for me and making sure I was okay. And really, that's people that were in the rooms next to me, people in my discussion group, like they were checking up on me. So, we're talking about, my peers. And again, I'm 13, so these are my peers, like, give or take a year, 12, 14-year-olds that were, in some ways welcoming me with God, into God's presence. So they were the ones that, if we're talking about the welcome of God, they were the people that were there that kind of embraced me and shared that, and ultimately they were ones that led me to Christ in a way, and I'll get to that in a sec. So, there was a guest speaker of the camp. I don't remember much about what was said. I don't remember the sessions at all. I remember he was a black guy that had a really hearty, contagious laugh, and that's all I took away from the speaker. That's really it. But it was the testimony night, which is the last night before the camp ends, before everyone heads home. People gathered and shared, and that was the moment, I think, when again, my peers, the people my age, were all sharing about how God touched them and how God was in their lives. I think that was the beginning of my walk with God in a way. That was the very start of it. Because I went back to my empty room by myself, alone again. But I think because of that, I had time to think. I had time to process my thoughts and what happened that evening, and just thinking about it. And I remember lying in my bed, thinking like, this is interesting. This is pretty cool. The experience that I had that night with all the people sharing made an impact for me. And I thought, I want to be part of this. But I didn't know what to do. Because again, I'm a 13-year-old boy who's never been to a church camp, first experience with church, and I didn't know what to do. But I slept on it. And the next day, there was one final session before we leave. There was an altar call. Again, don't know what that is. So people went up. Maybe they were paying attention, they were listening, but I wasn't paying attention or listening. So people went up and did the altar call, because, but I stayed seated because I didn't know what was going on. And after the session, I think somebody did ask me, he's like, "Hey, did you go up?" I'm like, "Nope," because I didn't know what it was. And they were like, "Well, that was your chance of becoming a Christian." And in my mind, I thought, uh-oh, I lost my chance. I guess I'll wait for some other time. Again, didn't know what's going on. I'm like, okay, so in my mind I was processing that, and that's how I processed it. I didn't know what was going on. I lost my chance. So, that session passed, that conversation passed, and then it was lunchtime, the final lunch before we leave, and it just so happened I think my group discussion leader just happened to be there and just go, "Hey," just casually asking, "How was the camp? How was your experience?" And I said, "Oh, it was fun, it was good," and then at the end of it, I did say, "But I think, I lost my chance of becoming a Christian because I didn't go up through the altar call." And to my surprise, at that time he was like, you can become a Christian anytime, would you like to do it now? I'm like, "Oh, sure." So he took me aside into a quieter hallway, and we were going to do the sinner's prayer. And that friend that I had mentioned earlier, but the one that really didn't play a role into my camp experience because he was so busy and not around, he happened to be walking by that quieter hallway, and he stopped, and he was part of the, he was there when I prayed and accepted Christ. So it is very, to me, as I reflect back on that story, the invitation of God was there, and obviously I invited him into, I invited God into my life that day, but all the different nuances and all the very, very specific and details that were part of my story, I think it's very unique. I still remember it to this day. All the pieces kind of fit in, and it's been like 35 years, and I still remember that story and that kind of feeling to this day, and as I reflect on it. So it's like that invitation, for me was, very unique and memorable. And again, just to think about how my friend who was just not around for, 3 days, happens to walk by this one corridor and was part of that experience with me. So that is God doing his thing in his time. Actually, for the record, I wasn't the only person that thought that they missed their chance of becoming a Christian that day. Because I was on the bus on the way back, and I was talking to the guy next to me, and he thought he also had missed his chance of becoming a Christian. So I told him, hey, no, you don't have to. You didn't miss your chance. You can go talk to your group leader. So he accepted Christ on the ferry on the ride back. So I'm not the only one, which is good to know. But apparently it's a thing, if you don't know how this works. But again, a very unique experience. I won't forget it, and it's been, again, like I said, 35 years, and it's still very memorable to this day. So that's the invitation part of the welcome. The other aspect of welcome for me is that sense of being in his presence or comfort or embrace, like I was talking about earlier. Having a hard time finding that single word to describe it to me. So it is a combination of all those words and feelings kind of put together for me. For as long as I can remember, I've always felt his welcome, his presence, his comfort. There is and has been this lingering sense of God in my life. And I think with that, I'm able to have different outlook to things and just have different approaches to situations or scenarios. I've never doubted God or I've ever had the sense that he's been distant. I've always been confident in his presence and his provisions. I just know I don't really know how to explain it, but that's just this feeling that I've had with him for as long as I can remember. That's not to say that there aren't any kind of, trying times or difficult times in my life. There are, but it's just when things get chaotic in terms of either my emotions or the scenarios or the situations that I'm put in, I can always get back to being centered and calm when I realize and remember that God is there. And it doesn't take much for me. I just think about it, and I'm like, okay, I feel better. For an example of that is it wasn't that long ago, but I guess it's been 5 years. But when our dog passed away, our dog of 17 and a half years passed away. His name was Solomon, for those of you who remember him. He was with us for a long time. And then a few short months after that, my dad also passed away. So it was a time where, as you can imagine, my emotions would run wild every so often, and it just happens. But I do also remember that, just being able to remember to reminisce and think about God's presence, that he's there with me. It keeps me grounded, and it relaxes me. And that's just one instance that I can think of, where just calling on God quickly, and I feel just a sense of calm and relief. The relationship I have with God, I feel like it's one where we can sit quietly together and just hang out. I don't know if any of you have friends like that, where you can just be in the same room, but you don't need to speak. You can just sit, and you're comfortable, and everything's okay, and you're together, and that bond just builds. That's what it is like with me and God. That's how I feel it's like. I don't need to speak to him. He doesn't need to speak to me. I find that we actually don't have a lot of conversations together. I think it's partly because I actually don't think I actually hear God in the moments. So it's hard to have conversations when I can't hear someone. But I do feel his presence, and that's kind of what works for me. So, while I can't discern his voice in the moment, I often do reflect back and think, hey, I think God was speaking to me that time, or I remember those nudges and be like, yep, God was nudging me to do these things, or, yeah, I think just me going into eldership. That's kind of that experience I shared before, where there are a lot of nudges, a lot of inklings, a lot of probing by God for months, and obviously I became an elder, so eventually I got there. And then as I reflect, I'm thinking, yeah, those were the nudges. I can, I can think back and remember those, but in the moment, I don't hear him. So that's been kind of a challenge for me. I don't know if that's really something I need to be working on, but that's something being able to discern his voice is not something that I've been able to do very well. But I do feel his presence. So I take that, I feel him, I experience him, I just don't hear him. But that's been working for me. It's working for kind of my relationship with God, and that's been, it works. But it could be better, maybe. So back to Mary and Martha. I'm thinking, I would say that I'm very much a Martha in the story, or in my faith, where I can just sit and experience. I kind of just be in the awe of and be in the presence of God, and just being there. So that's kind of, again, that's the welcome of God that I've experienced in the last little while. And I like to end this time of sharing with something that came up during the men's group, where they were trying to encourage me. Someone said, "Hey, maybe you can tie in one of your passions into your sharing. That might help." Because I was thinking about how to, on Wednesday I was still kind of figuring, okay, I don't know what to share. So that was a suggestion. So I'm like, okay, cool. Maybe I can try something. So I did. So I'm going to talk about briskets. So some of you know, probably a lot of you, I like to make brisket. So I'm going to tie how making a brisket relates to my story. In this case, I am the brisket. God is the chef, or the pit master, as you will, and the process of making the brisket is my journey. So step one, what do you do to making a brisket? You got to choose a brisket. Probably from a butcher would be a good idea, but I like going to Costco. Costco has the best briskets for the value, the price, the size, all that. It's Costco for me. So I like to think that step is God handpicking me, choosing me. So that's step one. Step two is the preparation. Usually when I buy briskets, it's not for the next day to make. I usually buy it and have one stored on hand for when I need to make it. So it's usually in the freezer. So preparation is defrosting it, and then once it's defrosted, you start trimming the fat, then you start seasoning it, then you refrigerate it for a little bit more so the seasoning sticks, and at some point you got to take it back out and let it go to room temperature before you can cook it. So that's what happens when you start the grill. You let it go to room temperature. So I like to think all these preparation steps are the seeds that were planted in my life. So all those people that were placed in my life, all the different nudges from God, that's the preparation process. Step three, putting this brisket into the smoker. That's the start of the journey. That's it. You put it in. That's the start. Step four is the slow cooking of the brisket itself to just the right temperature and doneness. And that's my walk with God. And obviously that's the longest process. And there are different stages to the cook. It's very raw at the beginning. But as time goes on with the smoke and the heat, as it kind of fills the smoker, I like to equate that to God's teaching, the experiences, the community, the fellowship, all that kind of starts. And now the brisket is forming a bark. It is now forming a smoke ring. It is building the brisket, right? And flavor, yes, flavor for sure. That's the bark. And all these things contribute to the development of the bark and the brisket. And as the smoke and the heat continue to permeate, the brisket is now slowly getting cooked and is getting warmer and heated up and it's getting closer and closer to being done. All the while, God, aka the pitmaster, will leave the cooking mostly alone, because usually you kind of leave the brisket alone. You don't want to touch it too much, but is always monitoring and never very far away. And we'll often check and make sure things are still going okay. So maybe a little spritz here or there to make sure that, if the brisket is looking dry, you want to spritz it. You want to turn up the heat because it's cooking. Turn up the heat because it's cooking too slow, or you turn down the heat because it's cooking too fast. So whatever the case, the brisket is, being tended to and watched over. I am being tended to and watched over throughout my journey. With every slow cook like this, there's also something called the stall, where the temperature of the meat plateaus. And with that, you can either wait out the stall, which could take hours, or you can tend to it and make it go a little bit faster. And with that, typically you would take brisket out, do some stuff with it, maybe add some more fat to it, add some moisture to it, and then you wrap it up and you put it back into the grill and let it cook the rest of the way. So this, I like to equate the stall as obstacles in my life, where God will take me out and nurture it, and nurtures me through them. So that's the slow cooking part. Step 5. Once the brisket is cooked to the right temperature, you take it out and you have to let it rest. You never cut into a hot piece of meat because you want the juices to redistribute back into the meat itself. So you need to let it rest so that it is the brisket is juicy and the timing is there's timing to it. And this is where I like to think this is God's timing specifically for the things in my life that He's called me to. There is a waiting period, there is a priming period, and it is all in God's timing. And step 6. Slicing and sharing the brisket. Can this step be any more obvious? This is about sharing God's welcome to others, inviting them to join the table and to the feast. I know this is not the perfect metaphor because my life isn't, it's not this linear between the, before, you don't wait till I'm fully cooked, fully rested before I can be shared. I believe my journey is a combination of the cook, the rest, and the slicing, rinsed and repeat over and over again. So anyways, the men's group suggested I bring some brisket to share to illustrate this. With all this busyness, I didn't do it. Or did I? Well, I am the brisket, and I am sharing. So metaphorically speaking, I brought brisket to share. And that is me sharing, my story today and, of God's welcome to me and also how to make a brisket. That is all.